Hi everybody, Magpie here. Like the guys and I said in the last episode impressions video, there was a lot of things that the anime missed in the post-credit scenes. So we wanted to share the epilogue by doing a read aloud. Because this chapter is from Lutz's point of view, Jonathan Kayne was kind enough to record it for the channel. I hope you enjoy it. Finally, if you enjoy the light novel, please consider supporting the author and purchase the official light novel translation. Now, without further ado, Part 2, Volume 4, Epilogue.
Lutz was in the Gilberta Company. He had just escaped there with the others after Mine and Thule were attacked by strange men on their way home, with Gunther, Daniel, and Otto managing to get them back following a tough fight. "Otto! Lutz! What happened? Tell me everything you can without breaking any secrets," Benno yelled, rushing up the stairs. Someone must have told him that they had fled there. Otto debated what to say for a second, then narrowed his eyes at Benno in a glare. "Benno, keep your voice down. You'll wake Renata." Yeah, whatever. Lutz, ignore Otto and tell me what you can." Otto and Benno's usual back and forth helped Lutz relax just a little. He started to explain the situation, starting with Thule having to come to walk home together. They then met Otto searching for another Dutchie's noble on the way home, and while talking to him, they were attacked. The attackers were after Mine, but given they argued about which girl to get, they couldn't have known her very well. Daniel stopped the attackers in their tracks, and then they ran to the Gilberta Company. From there, Mine and Gunther went to the temple to tell the high priest what had happened, while Daniel called the knight's order over. "Oh yeah, Mine apparently called for help too," Otto murmured. All eyes fell on him. Lutz, having been racing to keep up with Gunther, hadn't noticed Mine calling for help. There was so much that Lutz didn't know, especially given that Gunther had stopped him from going to the temple, and that just made him even more frustrated with himself. She stamped some blood from her knee onto a charm hanging from her neck. Apparently, someone would come help her if she was in trouble. Lutz had no idea what all that was about, but Benno seemed to have an idea. "This is much too soon! Damn it all!" he spat, then spun around to return to the store. "Master Benno, what happened? It's absolutely top secret!" Benno yelled as he raced down the steps, cursing at who knows what. Lutz bit his lip. Something was happening right now, and he had no idea what it was. Mine was in so much danger, but he couldn't do anything for her. There was a wall he couldn't climb over no matter how hard he tried. A wall keeping him from her. A wall no matter of guts or determination would overcome. Look, Benno's yelling made Renata cry. What a scary uncle he is. There. Otto picked up Renata and started gently rocking her, which was enough to bring Karina back to her senses. Her widened eyes had been fixed on Benno's intense expression. Thule also seemed to relax slightly, the stiff look on her face loosening as everyone moved towards Renata. She had been shaking and hadn't said a word since coming here, but now she murmured something about how she was supposed to have brought the toy she made with Mine. That inspired Otto to start bragging about Renata, which Thule fought back against by bragging about Camille. "I'm tired of listening to you both, seriously." Lutz, unwilling to join the conversation about babies, walked up to a window and looked down the street. He thought he might be able to see the soldiers and knights moving around, but all he saw was the usual flow of people, as if the ambush had never happened at all. "Mine's okay, right?" "Thule, we're going to the temple. Come here." After some time, Gunther came to get Thule. His left arm was covered in what looked like severe burns. Her face paled when she saw the black and red discoloration streaking down his forearm. "Dad, what happened to your arm? Where's Mine?" "She's in the temple. Come on." The cheerful smile Gunther always had on his face when talking about to his daughters was nowhere to be seen. A frown creased his forehead, and his voice came out uncharacteristically flat. Effa was behind him, Camille in her arms. Given she had only just recently given birth, she wasn't supposed to be moving around much yet. If she was being called to the temple that with everyone else, something had definitely happened to Mine. Sensing that, Lutz looked up at Gunther. "Mr. Gunther, I can. I'll explain later. Wait here. No matter how close he and mine were, they weren't family. That was why Lutz hadn't been called as well. All he could do was wait at the Gilberta Company, unable to go to the temple by himself. I'll either be on the first floor or at Benno's place on the second floor. The first floor or the second floor? Alright. Up until now, he had been at Karina's place, since Tully was scared and he wanted to stay by her side. On his own, however, there was no need for him to be there. As a Leehurl, he belonged at Benno's place on the second floor, one floor down. I'm just gonna be anxious all day if I sit around doing nothing. Might make more sense for me to get some work done. Lutz followed Gunther and the others down the stairs to the store on the first floor. As they reached the exit, Gunther suddenly turned around and glared at Otto, who was still holding Renata. Otto, you hurry back to the gate. Tell the commander a knight ordered me to go to the temple. Yes, sir. Lutz saw Mine's family off and then went to the store. Benno and Mark were discussing printing workshops with deadly serious expressions on their face. There must have been some kind of secret to Mine's charm, one that would have had an enormous impact on these workshops they had planned. If I don't hurry up and get to work, I'm going to be left behind. Benno wasn't even thinking about Lutz when he had heard about Mine's charm and rushed down the stairs. He hadn't even called him to his discussion with Mark. He had no choice but to give up on going to the temple, but he wasn't about to be excluded from the printing workshops too. I'm not going to let them leave me behind. Lutz pumped himself up and started working through the Mine's Workshop's profit ledgers. Gil was working hard to learn math, but wasn't quite good enough to manage by himself. He still needed Lutz to look over his work. Why not just leave that all to the workshop? If they mess up and lose money, that's on them, Leon said with a grimace as he peeked over Lutz's shoulder. He was a Leehurl being trained as a waiter in the temple who had a considerable amount of experience dealing with workshops and stores, and firmly believed that Lutz was getting too involved in the mine workshop. After all, Lutz was looking over their ledgers and doing all sorts of additional work for them. From an outsider's perspective, it did seem to be a clear case of favoritism, but Lutz didn't see it that way at all. The orphanage branch of the mine workshop is just a trial run for the new printing workshops they're going to be made. I've got to do a good job here. New workshops? You're doing that kind of work? Leon raised his voice in surprise, and Lutz gave him a big nod. Unless I get good enough to help Master Benno establish new workshops, he won't bother to take me to different cities. Messing up with the mine workshop a little is no big deal, so he's told me to use it as practice. This isn't actually favoritism at all. So they're just a stepping stone, huh? Leon wasn't wrong. Unlike the children of merchants, Lutz didn't have a family store he could practice with. Mine's workshop was the only place he could use to grow and while not having to worry about making mistakes. It was when he had finished the paperwork and was waiting for Benno to look it over that balls of light suddenly burst in through the window. They passed right through the glass and then started to spin around the room. What the? Benno, Mark, and Lutz all stared wide-eyed at the spinning balls turned into glimmering dust that rained down on them. Oddly, the light seemed to be avoiding Leon entirely. As Lutz stood in place looking up at the ceiling in a daze, the light gradually faded. Eventually, it disappeared completely, as if nothing had happened at all, and the stunned silence fell over the room. What the heck was that? Benno asked. I do not know, Mark replied. Leon looked over in bewilderment. That stuff was definitely avoiding me, right? Lutz looked down at his palm, where some of the light had landed. None of it had remained, instead having seemingly melted into his body. Everyone blinked in confusion, wondering what had happened, why the dust had avoided Leon, until eventually Gunther and the others returned to the store. Sorry for the wait, Lutz. They all wore dark expressions, and their eyes were puffy from crying. Lutz had assumed they had gone to fetch Mine from the temple, but she was nowhere to be seen. Nervous butterflies fluttered in his stomach. He kept his mouth shut, worried that if he asked where Mine was, he would never be able to go back to how things once were. Lutz looked around the room, trying to find something else to talk about, when suddenly his eyes fell on Gunther's arm. The skin was smooth, the discolored burns from before having vanished entirely. Mr. Gunther, your burns! It was Mine's last blessing. Her light dust healed the burns. Gunther grunted through clenched teeth. Lutz looked at Tully and Effa, shocked by Gunther's choice of words. Last blessing? Lutz swallowed hard, his body trembling. But before he could ask Gunther what he meant, Mark clapped his hands together. Then I suppose the light dust we just saw was mine's blessing as well? The light came here too? Gunther asked, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. Lutz nodded hard, explaining how balls of light had burst into the room, then turned into a dust that rained down on everyone except Leon. Seems like the light went to everyone mine cares about. Pretty strong blessing too. It'd have to be to cure those burns, Gunther said with a sad smile. The resignation in his eyes told Lutz everything. It had all ended elsewhere in a place he could never go. What happened to mine? Why isn't she here? Mine's gone now. The nobles took her. She's gone, Tully said, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto the floor. Benno furrowed his brow hard and narrowed his eyes. Gunther, tell me one thing. Is the mine workshop going to keep running? Master Benno, mine's gone, and now is not the time for that. Shut up! This is important. If she's dead, I'll have to buy the workshop and keep it going. If the nobles took her, I'll have to do something else. And the sooner I act, the better. Lutz couldn't understand what Benno was saying, but it seemed Gunther did. Benno, do you know? I'm not sure about the details, but Otto said she stamped that charm with her blood. I know what'll happen if mine didn't die. AoaB Ehrenfest will take her. So, what's the name of the new forewoman? Gunther, glaring at Benno with eyes so cold they froze Lutz's blood, opened his mouth. Rosemine, the daughter of an archnoble. She runs the workshop now. Mine's dead. That's the story. That's the story? Lutz was at a loss for words, and Gunther ruffled his hair entirely like he would do to mine. Mine became the daughter of an archnoble to protect us, to protect her family, to protect you. For the Archduke to be able to adopt her, she needs to be known as the daughter of an archnoble, and that'll save her life and ours. But in return, we were forbidden through a magic contract to ever treat her like family again. You are all in too deep with mine. Be careful if you don't want to get executed. I appreciate the warning, Benno said sincerely before letting out a sigh and slumping his shoulder. Still, I thought we had at least 2 years to prepare for this. Life sure comes at you fast. What? Master Benno! Mine's gone! An archnoble took her and she can't see her family as family anymore. What are you saying? Lutz yelled, shocked by Benno's attitude. But all he got was a cold look from him. Listen up, Lutz. That weirdo didn't die. She's gonna keep on living as Rosemine. You think that weirdo is gonna change as a person just cause she went from being a commoner to an archnoble's daughter? No! The only thing that's changed is how much more terrifying her rampages are gonna be now that she's an actual authority, Benno roared. Mine stomping around was scary enough already, but now that she had the authority of an archnoble, there would be nobody who could stop her. Not to mention, if she'd only changed her name, then Rosemine's still going to be a partner in the Italian restaurant. The Gilberto Company just finally managed to get business from med nobles after years of serving lay nobles. And now we're suddenly co-owning a business with an archnoble? If you've got time to be all weepy, get to work instead. Whether her name's Mine or Rosemine, what's that weirdo going to want? A bookworm whose obsession had survived an actual death and reincarnation wouldn't change her ways just from becoming an archnoble named Rosemine. There was only one thing she would want more than anything else. Books! That's right. She's higher in status now, and we're going to have to make some changes. But we're still a business doing trade, and with the Archduke's approval, we're going to be doing business with Rosemine whether we like it or not, Benno said. And all of Mine's family shot their heads in his direction. You all might not be able to meet and talk to an archnoble, but we can still talk to Rosemine as business partners. We've got paper to exchange, and it would be more than easy to slip some letters amid all the papers. I predicted this would happen and already had Lutz and Mine sign a magic contract together, and if all else fails, we'll be able to stay in written contact with her. They couldn't face Mine and call her family, but nothing stopped them from writing letters to her. Benno had a pained grin and he explained that even magic contracts had loopholes. Is that true, Lutz? If I write Mine a letter, will you be able to give it to her for me? Tully asked, pulling Lutz back to his senses. There were still things he could do for Mine. As long as he was alive, it wasn't too late. he could make books and act as a bridge between her and her family. And with that in mind, he gave a big nod. "You can count on me." They left the store together and started on their way home. Mine was, for all intents and purposes, dead to the world. They would have to hold a funeral for her as soon as they got back. "Lutz, mine was killed by the noble who broke into the city. Tell that to your family. We've got our own preparations to take care of," Gunther said, his brow tightly furrowed as he looked up at the sky. In a way, that explanation wasn't too dishonest. After all, it was because of this noble that mine had to become a noble herself. All right. After getting home, Lutz told his parents about mine's funeral, and they had all hurried to finish their dinner. His parents were the first to rush outside, each wearing black cloth wrapped around one arm. Lutz and his brother Ralph followed suit, each wrapping black cloth around one arm to signify they were involved with the funeral. "Hey, Lutz, why did mine die? She was doing better lately, wasn't she?" "Mr. Gunther said a noble killed her. I don't know anything else since I wasn't there." Neighbors wearing black cloth wrapped around their arms gathered by the well in the plaza. Normally, the corpse would be rested on a board to be carried to the graveyard, but without a corpse, they couldn't do that for mine. Instead, there was a tiny box. Inside were mine's clothes and the hair stick she usually wore. Nothing else. "What's going on here? Where's the body?" one of the neighbors asked. Everyone was surprised by the unusual funeral. Gunther, who was leading the funeral, grimaced and looked at the ground. There was clear pain in his eyes. "Mine was attacked by a noble from another duchy. They killed her and stole her body." That's real tragic. I'm sorry for your loss." Everything that was stolen by nobles would never come back. Everyone in the neighborhood knew how deep Gunther's love for his kids and how much he doted on mine despite her sickly nature. They knew without asking how much it hurt for him to not even get her body back. And since nobles were involved, nobody asked him about anything else. It's a real shame, too. She was finally getting healthy again. The neighbors looked at the wooden box and thought back to how mine had been during her baptism and Camille's birth, and began sharing stories and the like. It was said that the door to the land of the dead opened only at dawn, when the god of darkness and the goddess of light met, and that the husband and wife gods would guide the recently deceased there when the morning sun had risen. Those who knew the deceased would share memories and talk all night until the departed had safely moved on, but mine had barely spent any time with her neighbors, so there wasn't much for them to say. "Hey, Lutz, you were close with mine, weren't you? Say something about her." Lutz thought back over the 2.5 years he had spent with mine. At first, she couldn't even walk to the gate. She had wanted to make books, but didn't have paper or ink. She had tried weaving grass fibers together, then making clay tablets. Even when she did manage to make paper, there was a lot more she needed to do before she could actually make a book. Mine would always collapse as soon as she decided to do something, but she always worked hard to get what she wanted. When we first started, she'd get out of breath just walking to the well, but in the end she could walk all the way to the forest on her own. Oh yeah, that reminds me. She sure did a lot of weird things, like shave wood and mess around with clay. Didn't you two boil wood in a pot, Lutz? Faye and his friends, who had gone to the woods with mine, started talking about what they remembered her doing there. That must have encouraged Lutz's family to start talking too. All the recipes mine thought up tasted great. Mine learned letters and math while helping Gunther at the gate, and she taught all that to Lutz too. She was smart. Oh yeah? I didn't know about that. After their baptism, Lutz had become an apprentice merchant, and mine was an apprentice shrine maiden in the temple. But he didn't talk about that in public, since the temple shrine maidens didn't have a very good reputation. As far as everyone here was concerned, she was just helping out at the gate and doing the paperwork that Lutz brought back from the Gilberta Company. Barely anyone knew what mine had really been doing since her baptism. Mine had founded a workshop in the orphanage, made ink, and finally made books, became Johann's patron, and had him make metal letter types for her, funded Heidi's research into colored ink, and after some trial and error with Ingo, finished the printing press. She was amazing. And Lutz wanted to tell everyone that, but he couldn't. He had no idea how much of the bookmaking process was safe to talk about. Mine was weak and slow to grow, Effa began, holding Camille in her arms. We were always scared that she might not live to see the next day. Tuli started getting more independent when she was 2 or 3, but it took mine until she was a 5. Before then, she would always cry about how unfair it was that only Tuli was healthy, and how unfair it was that we all got to go outside. It seemed to hurt her as a mother that mine hadn't been born as a healthy child. That was probably the old mine, Lutz thought. The mine he knew would never cry about things being unfair. She worked hard to get stronger on her own terms, and while she often ran in circles, she was always dedicating her all to getting the books to read. But once she did stop crying about things being unfair, she started getting mad about things. She'd say, "I hate this body," and start cleaning the house until she broke out in a fever. She'd do weird dances until she fell over, and say eating certain things was good for her body before ending up getting stomach aches. Effa continued with a small smile. Now that's mine, I know. It was easy for Lutz to remember and visualize all the weird things mine had done. It was around when she stopped crying and getting mad about things all the time that she started going to the forest with Lutz. She never expected to be the same as normal kids, but she still got strong enough to go outside and join festivals. Think that after all this, she would be taken away from us like this. Having said their piece, Mine's family shed tears and offered no more words, but everyone understood. Their daughter had finally gotten healthy, only to be killed by an outsider noble who had then stolen her body. It would be a quiet funeral. Under the glow of the dancing fire that lit the plaza, Gunther silently carved a grave marker for Mine out of wood, tears running down his cheeks all the while. They waited out the night, taking turns to nap. When second bell rang, the wives began distributing bread and tea. It was forbidden to eat meat before the funeral was over. After finishing their simple breakfast, they shouldered the light board and headed to the temple. They needed to report the death and then collect the medal permitting the burial. When they arrived, the temple gate's guard led them into the chapel. It was standard for Grey priests to handle the deaths of citygoers, but for some reason the high priest was there this time. A 7-year-old born in the summer named Mine? Very well. After leaving them to wait in the chapel for a bit, the high priest returned with a flat white medal, which he handed to Gunther. It was the medal Mine had stamped with blood during her baptism. These served as a show of government approval for the burial, and as substitute gravestones for poor commoners who couldn't afford their own. With the medal in hand, they went to the graveyard outside the city. As there was only a light box on the board, the men shouldering it were able to walk quicker than they usually would. They were also quieter than usual, since none of them knew Mine very well. They buried the box in the corner farthest from the graveyard's entrance. It didn't take long to dig the grave since the wooden box was so small. Gunther pressed the medal against the grave marker he had carved. It stuck tightly to the board, which he then stabbed deep into the ground so that it would stand upright, just like those marking the surrounding graves. Graves for the rich had words carved into the marker, but since few poor people could read, the nearby graves didn't have any words on them. People would instead identify them based on the shape of the wood and where the metal had been stuck onto it. Mine's grave, however, said the words, "Our beloved daughter," beneath where the metal had been stuck. With the burial finished, the funeral was complete. There would have been discussions of wills and succession had she been the head of a house, but none of that was necessary for Mine, since she had died so soon after her baptism. Everyone returned to their daily lives the next day. Lutz was back to his normal schedule, too. He left his house, raced down the stairs, past the well, and taken up another set of stairs before knocking on the door. Tuli answered, a curious look on her face. "Morning, Lutz. Did something happen?" "Did something? Oh!" Now that Mine was Rose Mine, he wouldn't be walking her to the temple anymore. He wouldn't need to watch over her and stop her from wandering all over the place. He wouldn't have to make sure she was staying healthy. He wouldn't be making anything with her. He wouldn't be hugging her whenever she needed it. He wouldn't be there when she was in trouble and needed a shoulder to cry on. There was nothing for him here anymore. Mine's really gone, huh? There was a part of him that expected Mine to still be there, but as Rose Mine, she needed to live in as a proper daughter of an arch noble. Mine was gone, and now that she was Rose Mine, would never again be the girl that Lutz had known and spent much of his life with. For the first time, Lutz truly understood that Mine was gone. He trembled, and the tears that hadn't come out during the funeral suddenly burst forth. Tuli gently stroked his head till he calmed down, just like she used to do with Mine. Lutz, you can still talk to Mine through work, can't you? I can talk to her, but she's not mine anymore. That's true, but Mine said all the way to the end that even if she can't talk to us like normal, at least she wants to see us, Tuli murmured, thinking back on her last conversation with Mine. She couldn't call them family, but Mine still wanted to see that they were doing okay. With that in mind, she would probably want to keep talking with Lutz, even if it's just about business. Well, Lutz, could you take me to the Girl-Berta Company today? Huh? Why, Tuli? I want to keep my last promise to Mine, Tuli said before going to the bedroom. She came back with a tote basket Mine had always carried around, inside of which was the toy she had made for Renata and Mine's diptych. I promised to join Miss Karina's workshop, become a first-class street seamstress, and make Mine's clothes for her. I want to go meet Mrs. Karina so that I can make that happen. You made your own promises to Mine, didn't you? Tuli's question made Lutz remember all the things he had spoken to Mine about. He had promised to make and sell books together with her. He had promised to make all the things she thought up. Guess now is not the time for me to be crying. He had to make enough books that Mine could spend all day, every day, lazing around the room reading them. Lutz wiped his eyes and picked up his stuff, and with Tuli beside him, opened the heavy door leading outside. End of chapter.